130, that's the number of suspected terrorists. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Sweden and Finland need to deport or extradite to secure their bid to join NATO. On Sunday, President Erdogan said the Turkish parliament could not ratify the Scandinavian countries' desire to join the alliance unless they fulfill the commitments made last June to crack down on terror groups like the PKK operating on their soil. Tensions between Türkiye and Sweden worsened over recent demonstrations by PKK supporters in Stockholm. Last week, Ankara summoned Sweden's ambassador after an effigy of President Erdogan was hanged at a protest. A Swedish prosecutor said on Monday that no investigation would be launched into the incident. Sweden and Finland both applied to join NATO last year following Russia's attack on Ukraine. Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu was in Washington this week, where he called for the sale of F-16s to be expedited. Some NATO members and U.S. lawmakers have tried to directly link Turkey's support for Sweden and Finland's NATO bid with the approval of the F-16 sale, a move Ankara says it firmly rejects. And for more, I'm joined by Mehmet Çelik. He is an editorial coordinator at Daily Sabah in Istanbul, and Mark Myrovitz. He is a professor who specializes in Turkish foreign policy and U.S.-Turkish relations at the Maritime College at the State University of New York. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Mehmet, what do you make of Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu's visit to the United States? Has it proven to be fruitful, and are there any breakthroughs?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not sure if I can, describe it as a breakthrough visit, given the fact that the U.S. is, playing its cards in a way to gain time, and with the whole rhetoric of we will continue cooperation and we'll continue talks or negotiations. I'm not sure if we can call it a breakthrough. However, I think it's the fact that there's a diplomatic channel. Despite all the disagreements, there's a diplomatic channel that is working. The fact that there's talks, I think it is fruitful. The fact that there's positive messages given from both sides regarding the F-16s, I think it is a positive meeting. I would hesitate to call it a breakthrough visit.
Okay, so Mark, some lawmakers in the United States are trying to link the approval of F-16s and Finland and Sweden's NATO membership bids. Turkey has rejected this claim and link. How is that playing in the U.S. and among the NATO countries?
All politics is local. That applies to the United States. It applies to Turkey. So I think to me, this was a very good visit. I think the trend is in a good direction, but remember that the Biden administration needs to balance what it wants to do, which it stated that it wishes to give the F-16s, with the congressional positions and pressures. That's been a constant issue, obviously, in all of our politics, and in particular in U.S.-Turkish relations. And I think that by kind of balancing the F-16s to Turkey and the F-35s to Greece and doing all these other steps that the administration is doing, is trying to trend this in the direction of getting this approved. The part about Finland and Sweden and the NATO accession is, of course, an issue as well. So there are a lot of balancing factors here, but I think overall, the meeting was a good meeting. The optics were very good. And I think that we will see progress on these issues. Maybe not immediately, but I think down the road, that is the plan.
So, Mehmet, what do you think? Is the U.S. striking a delicate balance here, or could the F-16 deal become hostage to the NATO membership bids of Finland and Sweden? I mean, what's the mood in the U.S., you think?
Well, I think it's multidimensional, and as as Mark said, there's a lot of balancing to do with regards to local politics in the United States. But I think the local politics is being influenced by some lobbies, like the lobbies in favor of Greece, or the lobbies in favor of, in other issues, for example, the lobbies in favor of Armenia, for example. So the local politics are being affected by these dynamics in the United States. However, I think there is some sort of linkages, but I think the F-16 issue and the Sweden issue should be totally separate issues, and this is how Turkey sees it.
So, Mark, although Turkey says like the two issues are completely different from one another, but what happens if Turkey remains opposed to the Nordic countries' NATO bids? I mean, how would that impact both Turkey-US relations as well as Turkey's relations with NATO countries?
Well, I mean, we're trying to predict in what decisions are going to be made and about linkages. I mean, obviously, it's a question of politics and perception. And to Mehmet Bey's point, I mean, American politics is based, particularly in the Congress, on constituents and constituent interests, and it's a complicated system, and it needs to be worked through to be able to get to the result. I think that there is progress even on the accession issues, even though if you look at it at any particular minute, it doesn't look that way. But I think we've gone very, very far from the trilateral memorandum in June, and we're making progress. So I think that there are a lot of moving pieces here, moving pieces that need to be addressed, including the domestic political agenda, which is very, very significant in American politics. So the president can't just say, I want to do this. He's got to get the request from the approval from the congressional committees.
Yes.
So I think they're working that. I think the optics of the meetings were good. They were very good, and I think even on the accession issue, that will move forward. And as I said before, the linkage of the Turkish F-16s and the Greek F-35s is kind of maybe it's not masterful, but it seems to be very, let's say, effective in getting everything approved or nothing approved, if you see my point.
So if we could move away from the US politics, Mehmet, what do you make of the latest protests by the PKK members in Stockholm, where an effigy of President Erdogan was hanged? I mean, how tense relations between Ankara and Stockholm become, and where are they headed now?
I think there's two sides of these protests. First of all, there's no way anyone in Ankara could accept these protests. In the name of democratic protests, these are anything but democratic protests. But with regards to the Turkey and Sweden relations, I think Turkey wants Sweden to talk the talk and walk the walk. So actions speak louder than the words. So far, Sweden has made some changes to its constitution, has made some remarks regarding cooperation with Turkey when it comes to fight against terrorism or standing against terrorism. So that's one thing. On the other side, I think the PKK side is also trying to give a message with these protests to Sweden. And I think what happened in France was a trailer for the overall movie that they want to put on the screen, across the European capitals. If there is a stance against them as strong as Turkey wants, or as strong as the rhetorical remarks coming from Swedish officials. So I think, there is that balance that they're trying to achieve on the Swedish side, but Turkey, is very clear with regards to the cooperation against terrorism, be it PKK or be it FETÖ.
Yes. So, Mark, Sweden's prime minister has said the protests were an act of sabotage to Sweden's NATO bid. How realistic is this, and why haven't such protests not taken place in Finland?
Well, I mean, these are two separate and completely different countries, clearly. But I would go back to the trilateral memorandum and what you've been asking about. And I think that the question, I think, is to what extent and at what point does Turkey see itself in a position where at least it can go forward on the accession, that it has gotten sufficiently enough of what it's asking for under that memorandum to be able to approve the accession. Because when it gets to a point where the other NATO allies perceive this in a negative fashion, and that is, I think, risky and problematic for Turkey in terms of obviously its significance in NATO, significant NATO power. And, so it becomes a matter more of perception than of reality.
Yes, but Turkey keeps saying that they have not fulfilled their commitments in a bid to join NATO. So you mentioned, of course, there are two different countries. But let me ask you this, Mehmet. If there are two different countries in this respect, could Turkey ratify Finland's bid and block Sweden's at the same time, or do they really go hand in hand?
Aisha, I would like to comment on Mark's point before I answer your question very briefly. First of all, with regards to accession, Turkey is not opposed to enlargement of NATO. Secondly, I think with regards to understanding Turkey's position, the Turkey's NATO allies have been, failing, I think, with regards to its fight against terrorism. And of course, it's very clear that Turkey sees, NATO as failing with regards to supporting Turkey's fight against PKK. So, that perception it should be based on Turkey's security concerns, not based on meeting halfway. I think if this is going to be a security bloc for security of all the members, that has to be ensured if there was going to be an enlargement. And Sweden and Finland both should be aware of that and supportive of that concern of coming from Ankara. With regards to your question, there's two different relationships here. I'm not sure how that could play out with regards to the accession technically. However, that is quite possible if it is technically possible. Turkey, if Finland fulfills its requirements for Ankara will go ahead with that if it is technically possible. And if Sweden fails to do so, then that will be something else to be discussed with Sweden.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.